Hello everybody, and welcome to the first ever Nuzlocke that I've done. And like a completely sane person, I decided that for the first ever Nuzlocke I've done, I should add a bunch of rules on top of it to make it way more difficult than it probably should be. Now, just in case there are people in the audience who don't know what a Pokemon Nuzlocke is, basically it's sort of a fan-made set of rules that you have to follow to make the game more difficult. Namely, you can only catch the first Pokemon you encounter per route, and once a Pokemon faints, it's dead and you can't use it anymore. Of course, this is not just a Nuzlocke, this is a hardcore Nuzlocke. And in a hardcore Nuzlocke, you're not allowed to use any items in battle aside from held items, and you are not allowed to overlevel the next gym leader. And on top of all of that, this isn't just a hardcore Nuzlocke. This is a hardcore Psychic-type Nuzlocke with Species Clause. Species Clause basically means if you catch a species of Pokemon, you cannot catch that species again. And the way that I'm implementing Species Clause, if I then run into that species again on a different route, that doesn't count as my encounter for said route. I can re-roll until I get a new species of the type that I haven't gotten before. And a Psychic Monotype Nuzlocke essentially means only Psychic types count. That does not mean that if I run into, for example, a Poochyena instead of a Ralts, I won't get the Ralts. I can re-roll until I get the Ralts. Or whatever else happens to be on that route. I think that's all the explanation out of the way, so without further ado, let's get into the actual Nuzlocke. Just a quick heads up, this is actually my third attempt, but on these first two attempts, not only did it go poorly, but also, turns out, I was recording my desktop, not the actual game, so that was fun to find out. Starting off, we're going to be going to the first route of the game, where the professor is being chased around by a level 3 Zigzagoon, which at first sounds kind of pathetic, but if you've played Legends Arceus, you know that low-level Pokemon can still completely destroy you if you're not careful. So, honestly, props to him for getting that close to wild Pokemon. They can genuinely mess you up. Anyways, I go ahead and pick Mudkip, not because Mudkip is a Psychic type, obviously not, but because, well, we need a starter until we can get a Psychic type, and also Mudkip is going to pretty much entirely be used for HMs and nothing else. Skipping past all the stuff with Professor Birch, we end up at our first rival battle, which, to be honest, is mostly just spamming tackle and winning because we have a 2-level advantage because I grinded a little between getting away from Professor Birch and getting to the rival. So, yeah, there really isn't much of a challenge here. Moving on. Skipping past yet another bit of mandatory story stuff, we're going to end up on Route 103, where we can catch our first Psychic type of the run, which is, to be completely honest, really unfortunate that we can catch one before the first trainer, because the first trainer in the game has a Poochyena. Now, if you don't know the Pokemon type chart very well, honestly, fair, nobody really needs to know it that well, but the fact is, Psychic type moves don't do anything against Dark types, and Poochyena is a Dark type. And the only Pokemon that we can catch here is Ralts. And Ralts, first of all, starts off with only Growl, so we have to waste all of its PP, and then struggle everything to death, potioning along the way. And we only have a limited supply of money, which means a limited supply of potions. Luckily, we have just enough to level it up so that it learns its first attacking move, which, unfortunately, as was just foreshadowed, is a Psychic-type move, so we have to waste all of that PP until we eventually get down to struggle again, at which point we will be at a decent enough level to fight the Poochyena without worrying too much about fainting from both being bitten by the Poochyena and struggle. Though, to be honest, RNG sucks and there is genuinely a chance that we are going to be absolutely bodied by this Poochyena and the run will end right here. Luckily though, that doesn't seem to be the case, as we successfully struggle the Poochyena to death and can move on to the next point in the run. you may have noticed that I did not heal and that I'm grinding again. This is because the very next mandatory fight is also against a trainer with a Poochyena. Absolutely lovely. This is going to be a recurring theme up until around the 3rd gym, so buckle in, we're gonna have a lot of struggle sessions today. After beating up the Aqua Grunt by using Struggle, we heal up at the Poke Center, grind a little, and very, very luckily manage to catch an Abra with a Twisted Spoon in a Great Ball. I think there's only like a 40% chance of that having worked, and there's only one other place in the entire game you can get Abra, so honestly, that was really clutch, especially with the Twisted Spoon. Anyways, on to Roxanne. The battle starts with me going for Confusion and Geodude, very luckily for me, missing Rock Tomb. Honestly, a lot of these battles are probably going to come down to RNG. Roxanne potions up as I use another Confusion. A 3rd Confusion takes the Geodude down, which leads into the 2nd Geodude. Another Confusion unfortunately leads to a Rock Tomb that actually lands this time and drops my speed, which hopefully isn't enough to drop it below Geodude's, or Nose Passes. Another Potion versus Confusion happens, and then a 3rd Confusion takes the Geodude down. Out comes Nose Pass, and despite this being Roxanne's ace, I do genuinely feel somewhat safe using Double Team here. This is mainly because I know that Nose Pass is probably going to set up, and when a Pokemon has a lot of setup moves, I've noticed that they tend to get stuck in a bit of a loop sometimes where they'll use setup moves for several turns in a row, so hopefully that's exactly what happens and I'm able to get off multiple double teams, though we'll see how that goes. Luckily, my read was correct, as Nosepass sets up twice, allowing me to raise my evasiveness twice. Although at that point I get a little bit nervous, and I decide to go for a Confusion next, which runs into another Harden, which is completely useless against me because I'm using special moves. Another Confusion goes into another Harden, but the Confusion after that unfortunately is met with by a Tackle. Not ideal. And it didn't miss despite the evasiveness raise, so yikes. And to make things worse, its Oranberry restores its health at the end of the turn. Luckily, as I go for another Confusion, its Rock Tomb misses, making those evasiveness raises pay off. Plus, to make things even better, it gets confused, meaning that it might hit itself in confusion instead of attacking me, which is very needed considering I only have 12 HP left at this point. And as I go for another Confusion, that's exactly what happens, bringing it to red. Now I just need one more Confusion hit or a miss, and it hits itself in confusion, allowing me to take it out with one final Confusion. With our first of 8 badges in hand, I grind for a little bit and get Boppity, our Abra, up to level 16, meaning it finally evolves into a Kadabra. Plus, it learns Confusion instead of just knowing Teleport, which honestly is phenomenal. Kadabra is honestly an incredible Pokemon on its own, and I hope that I can get it to live long enough to become an Alakazam, at which point this run will basically be won automatically. Anyways, we have to fight a grunt in a cave that stole an old man's Pico, I guess. So we do that, and it has to be a struggle session because, again, they're a grunt. They have a Dark-type Pokemon. We don't have a non-Psychic type attacking move yet, and that's going to stay that way until after the 3rd gym. The next rival fight I'm pretty sure is optional, but we curb stomp him anyway, and honestly there really isn't much to talk about. There wasn't a strategy, it was just spam. We really did it for the experience anyways, and honestly I'm thinking I might just skip the rival fights from now on because none of them were hard for me. There was not a single actually interesting moment in any of them, it was sort of just a curb stomp every single time. Maybe I just got lucky though. Next up is the gym leader Brawly, who has fighting type Pokemon. I think you can tell where this is going since fighting is weak to Psychic. I absolutely curb stomp him and level up in the process. At some point, I do evolve Ralts into Kirlia around this point, but I guess I just forgot to record it because I can't find the footage for that anywhere. Trust me, it happened off screen. Next up, we have to go to the museum and fight a bunch of Aqua Grunts, right in a row. And oh boy, it's another struggle session. I really am starting to hate this, but luckily this is the last struggle session of the entire run. So it's difficult, and genuinely we almost died during this, but honestly, I'm so glad that it's over. On the way to the next gym, in addition to grinding, we completely curb stomp the rival and then curb stomp Wally. There really isn't any strategy to either of these, I just sort of spam one attack and win. On a much less boring note, Watson. Watson sends out Voltorb as I send out my Kadabra. I use Psybeam and manage to get off a confusion as Voltorb uses Spark. Then I use Psybeam again as Watson goes for a Super Potion. Then Confusion gets the KO. Pretty easy. Even easier is Electrike, which I just Psybeam and immediately knock out, which lets me learn Recover in the middle of the battle, which is a really good move that I'm probably going to make use of in the upcoming battles. Third up is Magneton. I go for a Psybeam as Magneton Thunder Waves me, but I came prepared and have my Kadabra holding a Cherry Berry, so that cures it. A second Psybeam does lead to a confusion. Unfortunately, Magneton does not get confused and uses another Thunder Wave, so I'm going to be paralyzed for the rest of this fight. Then, to add insult to injury, Magneton snaps out of confusion, uses Supersonic, which luckily misses, and then I use Psybeam for the KO. Last up is his ace, Manectric. Manectric goes for Howl as I go for Psybeam, which activates Manectric Citrus Berry. Luckily, Manectric goes for Howl again on the second turn, as I go for Confusion, knowing that it'll do less damage than Psybeam, and knock it within just enough health that it won't trigger Watson to use a Super Potion, but will allow me to knock out Manectric with Psybeam. Finally, Manectric uses Quick Attack, which does put me in the red, but thankfully does not crit, which means I use Psybeam and win the fight. That was genuinely a close one. I almost lost Kadabra, and if that ever happens, yikes. 3 badges in hand, I head over to Meteor Falls where I nab a Soul Rock, which I named Flannerizer, because I intend for it to be a core part of my strategy against Flannery. Before Flannery, though, is Maxie. I'm gonna be completely honest, I was not prepared to fight Maxie at all. I genuinely forgot to heal up before fighting him, so this is genuinely a fight where I have the chance to lose some of my party members. I start out by sending out Boppity against his Mightyena, and use Shockwave, which runs into a Bite, which does nearly half damage. I play around the crit and use another Shockwave into a second Bite, which puts me in the red. Luckily, I know Maxie's going to use a Super Potion next, so I do a third Shockwave, and then finally a fourth Shockwave to KO the Mightyena. Out comes Zubat, and I'm not going to chance it at 5 hit points, so I swap to Flannerizer, which goes into an Astonish, which doesn't do as much damage as I thought it would. I use a Confusion into a Bite, which, puts me in red again, but because of Super Potion, I can Confuse twice again to kill the Zubat. Out comes Camerupt, and yep, it's another swap, this time to Struggles. Struggles swaps into a Focus Energy, luckily taking no damage on that first turn. I use Psychic, which makes the special defense fall on the Camerupt, but then that goes into an Ember that, again, puts me in a really bad position. Not in red this time, but still in a position where I could genuinely lose my Pokemon if I'm not careful. But I use another Psychic, and since I go first, it faints and I win. Thank you, Special Defense Drop. That was genuinely incredibly stressful, and I am hopefully not going to be doing that again for the rest of the run. I head south, grab a Spoink, name it Boracle 2 after the original Boracle that, again, died in one of the runs that did not actually record. Then I go ahead and grab the Why Not Egg, hatch it, and evolve it. I name it Knockback, by the way. I forgot to grab footage of it hatching. Next up is Flannery's Gym. I send out Flannerizer, which is its entire purpose, against Numel. Basically, with Flannerizer, the whole point of this fight is to use the Rock type to my advantage so that all of the normal and Fire type moves don't do a lot of damage to me. Hopefully that pays off. 2 Rock Throws into a Sunny Day takes out the Numel, and then another Rock Throw takes out the Slugma. Then Camerupt comes out. Camerupt is dangerous because if it uses Overheat while Sunny Day is still active, it genuinely can do some actual damage to my Pokemon, despite the fact that I do resist it. Luckily, it uses Tackle, and I use 2 Rock Throws to take it out. Last up is Torkoal. I use a Rock Throw against a Sunny Day, a Rock Throw against a Body Slam, a Hyper Potion comes out and I use Rock Throw again, Rock Throw against Body Slam, which unfortunately paralyzes me, Body Slam to Rock Throw, Hyper Potion to Rock Throw, Body Slam to Rock Throw, and Body Slam into Rock Throw. There really wasn't much of an interesting strategy for this gym. Sorry if it was just me saying Rock Throw the entire time. Anyways, I gave Struggles the experience share, so Struggles levels up and evolves into Gardevoir. Now that I can access the desert in the middle of Hoenn, I go ahead and nab a Baltoy, which is one of the last Pokemon that I'm going to be able to grab, and is going to be instrumental in my next gym battle against Norman. Basically, I intend to teach Baltoy Dig, and then use Dig against Slaking, thus getting around its Truant ability and not getting hit, hopefully, unless I mess up. We'll see if I mess up. And, spoiler alert, dear God, did I mess up. I start by sending out Boppity against the Spinda, which uses Facade against my Psybeam. I use Recover, and it uses a Hyper Potion. I use Reflect so that I take less damage from Facade, and it uses Facade again, so I have to use Recover again. It uses Teeter Dance, which confuses me, and I hurt myself trying to attack it with Psybeam, and it attacks me with Facade. I successfully Psybeam on the next turn, and for some reason it uses Teeter Dance even though I'm already confused. But that's fine because that means I don't take any damage and don't suffer any negative effects for that turn. I snap out of confusion, am able to use Recover, but then it Teeter Dances me again, and I'm confused again, and Reflect is gone. I hurt myself trying to set up a Reflect. Teeter Dance goes off again, which does nothing. I am able to Reflect just in time for a Facade. I hurt myself trying to recover, Teeter Dance. I hurt myself trying to recover, Teeter Dance. I snap out of confusion and do recover, Teeter Dance, I'm confused again. I hurt myself trying to Psybeam, Facade, no more Reflect. I hurt myself trying to Psybeam, Facade, and my Kadabra's gone. Genuinely, I forgot that this Spinda existed before going into this battle, because I haven't played Emerald in years. And I did not remember this Spinda being this horrifying. I am so sorry for losing this Kadabra. I was so excited for this to be an Alakazam, but it's fine. I have other Pokemon that can fill in those shoes for now. So, Gardevoir comes out. I use Confusion, and the Spinda faints. That was quick. Out comes Vigoroth, which uses a Facade, then I use Psychic and kill it. Slaking is out third, and I decide to switch to Flanarizer. It yawns me, and I use Confusion as it loafs before it puts me to sleep. This was a really stupid idea, and honestly, the yawn was the worst part of it. I'm so sad that it decided to use Yawn. It uses Facade while I'm sleeping, and I need a clean switch in for Toy Story 2 anyways, so goodbye, Flanarizer. Out comes Toy Story 2, and I use Sandstorm on its Loaf turn, not remembering that that was a Loaf turn and I probably should have used Dig. It uses Facade, putting me at 7 HP, which luckily doesn't kill me, against me using a critical hit Psybeam, which activates Slaking Citrus Berry. Then, on its Loaf turn, I use Dig. It misses a Facade, and I hit it with Dig. This goes on for 8 turns, or 4 digs total. I see that it's low on health, and I decide to go for a Psybeam during its Loaf turn. However, my math was slightly off, and it survives in the red. Luckily, it decides to go for a Hyper Potion, so I go for another Psybeam. Then it has a Loaf turn. Now, to explain where I was mentally at the time, I was genuinely panicking after my failed attempted kill, so I wasn't thinking straight when I hit Sandstorm on a Loaf turn. Then, of course, I had a decision. I could decide to swap out Toy Story 2 to continue my strategy and possibly sack, for example, my Spoink, but I really liked the 2 remaining Pokemon that I had, and I just couldn't sacrifice either of them. And so, Toy Story 2 dies to a Feint attack. That's 3 Pokemon down, 2 remaining because I forgot to bring Wobbuffet to the battle. I send out Boracle 2, and use Confuse Ray against Slacking during its Loaf turn. Confusion doesn't really do anything, but luckily, when I use Psybeam on the next turn, Counter fails. Then on its Loaf turn, I use Psybeam again, and the Sandstorm finally ends. I genuinely don't know what I was thinking using Sandstorm right before I was about to die. All that really did was hurt Spoink. Unfortunately, a Facade coming next turn immediately kills Boracle 2. I now only have my Gardevoir left. This run could genuinely be over before it even begins. Or at the very least, that's what I would say if Struggles didn't come out, and then just use Psychic against both of the remaining Pokemon to a bit of slashing damage in return from Linoon to immediately win. Dear God, I am in a really bad position right now. All I have left is a mostly useless Wobbuffet and Gardevoir. And while Gardevoir is very good, I was really hoping to get that Alakazam later down the line, because that would have made this run so much easier. And now all I have left is the remaining catches. And there are only 3 catches left. After beating up some Aqua Grunts at the Weather Institution and fighting my rival nearby, I head over to the Safari Zone in search of my encounter there, either a Girafarig or a Natu. Thankfully, I get a Natu, which I name Notifarig because it's not a Girafarig. I quickly evolve Notifarig into Xatu, so it's not useless this late in the game. Heading over to fight Winona, I start by sending out Struggles against her Swablu. I use Thunderbolt and kill it immediately. I then use Thunderbolt twice into Tropius as Tropius charges and then fires off a Solar Beam. This puts Tropius in range for a Hyper Potion, so I use the opportunity to use Calm Mind, and then, with a Thunderbolt and critical hit, I knock out the Tropius. Next up is Pelipper, which uses Protect on the first turn as I use the opportunity to go for Calm Mind. Then I use Thunderbolt and kill it instantly. I use Thunderbolt on the Skarmory that comes out next and kill that instantly too. A third Thunderbolt comes out against Altaria, which uses Dragon Dance, and its Oranberry activates. But even with an Aerial Ace the next turn, Altaria just isn't enough to stop me from using Thunderbolt one final time, gaining me the badge. Next up is a bunch of story stuff, but most importantly, I go ahead and grab a Chimico, which I named Chimber. There's not a whole lot to say about the fight against Maxie. I set up with Calm Mind and do get confused, but that never ends up mattering, as I just go for Thunderbolt to KO the Mightyena, and then go for Psychic twice to KO his other 2 Pokemon. There's not really much to say there, so moving on. Now that I have access to a fishing rod, I can actually go grab Staryu, which means I can get Starmie later. I decided to name it Starfy. If you know who Starfy is, good for you. Next up is Gym 7 with my rivals, Tate and Liza, because let's be honest, my actual rival in this game hasn't been putting up much of a fight. I send out Struggles and Natafarig against Claydol and Xatu. Natafarig uses Nightshade on Claydol, Xatu uses Calm Mind, Struggles uses Calm Mind, and Claydol uses Earthquake, which, because there are 2 Xatu on the field, only hits Struggles for about 45% or so. Natafarig uses Nightshade on Claydol again, Xatu uses Calm Mind again, and Struggles uses Thunderbolt on Xatu, which doesn't quite kill it. Claydol uses Earthquake again, putting Struggles in the red, and at that point I have to swap Struggles out, so I swap it out for Chimber. Sorry, Chimber! Natafarig uses Nightshade on Claydol for the KO, and it gets replaced by Solrock. Xatu then uses Psychic on Chimber for about a half. Natafarig uses Nightshade on Xatu for the KO, which is replaced by Lunatone, and then Solrock sets up with Sunny Day, allowing Chimber to use Yawn on Solrock without getting KO'd. Natafarig switches to using Nightshade on Lunatone, and then Lunatone uses Calm Mind. Solrock uses Flamethrower on Natafarig for about a third, thankfully not hitting Chimber, and then Chimber uses Yawn on Lunatone, and Solrock falls asleep. Natafarig uses Nightshade on Lunatone again, Lunatone uses Hypnosis on Chimber, putting it to sleep, and then Lunatone's Citrus Berry activates, putting Lunatone to sleep, meaning the only one awake on the battlefield right now is Natafarig. Natafarig uses Nightshade on Lunatone, and luckily Chimber wakes up on the first turn and uses Psywave, KOing the Lunatone. Wonderful. Then, on turn 8, Natafarig uses Nightshade on Solrock, Chimber uses Psywave on Solrock, and Solrock's Citrus Berry activates. Natafarig uses Nightshade again, and Chimber uses Psywave one last time to knock out the Soul Rock, which, weirdly enough, stayed asleep for that entire time. Well, that was honestly more of a curb stomp than I thought it was going to be, but to be fair, after the whole Norman debacle, I did decide to come prepared to this one because this is one of the fights that I genuinely thought might be a bit of a struggle. Speaking of struggling, I send out Struggles alongside Stevens Matang to fight Maxie and Tabitha. Struggles uses Thunderbolt on Mightyena, and Mightyena uses Scary Face in return, which is really gonna hurt because now Struggles is going to be going mostly last from now on. Yikes. Stevens Matang uses Metal Claw on Mightyena, getting the KO and leading to a second Camerupt. The first Camerupt, meanwhile, just uses Amnesia. Stevens Matang goes for a Reflect, as Camerupt number 2 goes for an Amnesia, and Struggles goes for Calm Mind. Camerupt number 1 uses Focus Energy, so basically nothing happens on turn 2. Turn 3, Stevens Matang uses Psychic on the second Camerupt, but it barely does any damage thanks to the Amnesia. Camerupt number 2 uses Amnesia again. Struggles goes for Psychic on the first Camerupt, which knocks it down to red health thanks to the Calm Mind, but then Camerupt number 1 uses Amnesia. This seems like it's kinda just on loop at this point. In turn number 4, Stevens Matang gets a crit with a Psychic on the first Camerupt, knocking it out and leading into a Golbat. Then the second Camerupt also gets a crit on its takedown on Stevens Matang. Meanwhile, Struggles uses Psychic on what used to be the first Camerupt but is now Golbat, leading to a knockout and a second Mightyena. Stevens Matang uses Light Screen, Mightyena uses Swagger on Stevens Matang, confusing it, and the second Camerupt uses Amnesia, so none of them do anything. Meanwhile, I use Thunderbolt on Mightyena for a KO. Stevens Matang hurts itself in confusion, Camerupt number 2 uses Takedown on Struggles, and Struggles uses Psychic on Camerupt, knocking it down to yellow. Stevens Matang uses Metal Claw on Camerupt, knocking it into red, but then a return Earthquake not only knocks Struggles into red, which is bad for me, but also knocks out Stevens Matang, leading into Aggron. Struggles uses Psychic for the KO, which leads into a Crobat, but I cannot afford to have Struggles stay out and potentially die. Even though there is a good chance that Psychic will kill Crobat, there's also a really good chance that Crobat goes first and knocks me out. So I swap to Natafarig. Aggron uses Protect, and Crobat goes for a Wing Attack, unfortunately into Natafarig instead of into Aggron. Great. Aggron goes for Protect again, as Crobat goes for Air Cutter, sort of hitting us both, but not really because of Protect. So Natafarig goes into yellow, and it's genuinely in range of being killed here. Natafarig uses Aerial Ace and barely does any damage, and it's at this point I realize that, oh god, I did not have a good moveset for going into this fight. Especially not with Struggles getting hurt the way that Struggles did. Crobat uses Mean Look, which, thank goodness, I didn't need any more damage this turn, as Natafarig goes for Wish. And then Aggron goes for Thunder, KOs, and wins me the fight. Honestly, godsend. That was genuinely wonderful. I have no notes. After Maxie comes Archie. I send out Struggles against Mightyena, and use Thunderbolt against it as Mightyena goes for Scary Face. Then, a Super Potion means that a second Thunderbolt doesn't quite kill it. Mightyena uses Swagger, confusing me, but another Thunderbolt knocks it out, leading into Crobat. Crobat uses Wing Attack, knocking me down to around half health, and then I snap out of confusion and use Thunderbolt against the Crobat. Sharpedo comes out next, and Sharpedo uses Slash, knocking me into yellow, luckily not critting and killing me. That was genuinely close, and I'm so glad that that didn't screw me over. Thunderbolt KOs for the win. There's a bunch of story stuff next, but honestly nothing that actually matters to the Nuzlocke, so I'm gonna skip ahead to the 8th and final gym leader. Juan sends out a love disc as I send out Struggles, and this is the part where not actually researching what's about to happen before it happens comes back to bite me. The last time I played this game was years ago, and I genuinely forgot that the first Pokemon that Juan sends out is really, really annoying. Struggles uses a Calm Mind to ensure that I knock everything out in one hit, as the Love Disc uses Lovely Kiss, confusing me. Oh good, I hurt myself in confusion, and it uses Attract, because of course I'm its opposite gender, so now I'm under confusion and love. Luckily, I immediately snap out of confusion, but am immobilized by love and hit with a water pulse. Then I'm immobilized by love and hit with a water pulse. Then I'm immobilized by love and hit with a water pulse. I hate gimmicks. Struggles finally is able to use a second Calm Mind and gets hit by another water pulse, and then uses Thunderbolt, again going through love, for the KO, leading into Crawdon. Then another Thunderbolt KOs Crawdon, leading into Whiscash. And then I sort of just hit Thunderbolt again because I forget that Whiscash is part ground type and is immune. Whoops. Whiscash uses Amnesia. I use Psychic, which knocks it into red, and would have killed it if I had thought of doing that on the first turn, but instead Whiscash gets off a Rain Dance, and then uses a Hyper Potion, and then I use Return and Psychic to kill it. That leads into Celio. Celio dies to a Thunderbolt, which leads into Kingdra. Unfortunately, Kingdra is faster than Struggles, so Kingdra goes first and uses Double Team, making Thunderbolt miss. Then I remember that, oh right, Kingdra's part Dragon type, so Thunderbolt isn't going to be the most effective thing to use here, Psychic is. So I go for a Psychic, and miss after Kingdra does another Double Team. 1/3 Double Team, and I genuinely wonder if it's possible to even hit this thing, but luckily I do, and Psychic lands to KO and win me the match. And the final gym badge. Next up is the Pokemon League. But before that, I do have to fight a guy that is so irrelevant to this entire run that I only mentioned him once in the sense that he was a Curb Stomp because he had a Ralts, and that's it. This time though, he seems to have come more prepared. Or at the very least, more prepared than me, who forgot to heal before the battle. First up is Altaria. Struggles uses Thunderbolt for a little under half, as Altaria goes for Aerial Ace. Then I go for a Return for some reason, I genuinely don't remember why, and that puts it in the red, meaning Altaria can go for a Dragon Dance. That's not good. A Full Restore gets used, which sucks, and then I use Return again. Altaria uses, luckily, Dragon Dance again before I can move, and then Struggles uses Psychic for the KO, leading into Delcatty, and then Psychic again for the KO, leading into Magneton. I think just because it was funny, I decided to use Thunderbolt against Magneton, and then it used Thunderbolt against me, and then I used Thunderbolt against it, paralyzing it and forcing it to not move. And then to add insult to injury, I used Return, a move that Magneton isn't even weak to, in fact resists, KOing it and leading it into Roselia. Then I knock out Roselia with a single Psychic, leading into Gardevoir, the final Pokemon. For some reason, I decided to go for a Return here. I think I remembered something about Gardevoir not having the best defense, but genuinely I don't know what I was thinking here using Return. Gardevoir uses Future Sight, so I don't have to worry about that for a couple turns. I knock him into low yellow with another Return, as Gardevoir returns with a Psychic. Then a Full Restore gets used, I use Return again, and Future Sight connects, which puts me in a bit of a danger spot health-wise, but I power forward anyways. I decide to switch to Thunderbolt, which puts Gardevoir into the red, and then Gardevoir uses Future Sight again, which means I don't take damage this turn. Awesome. Then Struggles finally uses another Return, knocking out Gardevoir and giving me the win against Wally. Genuinely, I was not prepared for this fight and hadn't looked anything up beforehand, though to be fair, I wasn't doing that for most of these fights, so honestly I'm glad I came out on top because that could have gone very sideways. Finally, the Elite Four. First up is Sydney, and I send out my Struggles against Mightyena. Struggles uses Calm Mind to ensure that it KOs as much as possible, while Mightyena unfortunately uses Sand Attack, and that's probably going to come back to bite me later. I use Thunderbolt to KO and lead to Shiftry. Then I use Thunderbolt, which doesn't do as much damage as I would like, and Shiftry uses Double Team, which is not going to go well with the Sand Attack from earlier. Yikes. I decide to switch to Return just to compare damage, and Shiftry uses Swagger to confuse me. Gross. Luckily, I am able to use Return on the next turn and knock it out, leading to Cacturn. Then I snap out of confusion and use Thunderbolt, and Cacturn uses Feint Attack in return, leading to the first damage of the fight on turn 6. Good job, buddy. Struggles uses Thunderbolt for the KO, leading into Crawdon. Then Thunderbolt misses, that Sand Attack finally paying off for Sydney, and Crawdon is able to get off a Swords Dance before another Thunderbolt KOs it, leading into Absol. which I just Thunderbolt again, leading to Sydney's defeat. Honestly, I was expecting this one to be somewhat easy, so good for me. Second up is Phoebe. I send out Natafrig against her Dusclops, as Dusclops uses Protect and I use Confuse Ray. Complete worthless turn, nothing happened. Then Natafrig uses Psychic, doing around 2/3 damage, as Dusclops returns with a Shadow Punch, doing about half damage. Yikes. Natafrig uses Psychic for the KO, leading into Banette. Natafrig uses Protect against Banette's Shadow Ball, and then uses Confuse Ray, causing Banette to hurt itself. Then Natafru uses Psychic, knocking Banette into low red, but unfortunately, Banette snaps out of confusion and uses Shadow Ball, knocking out Natafrig. Well, that's one gone, but at least it got us to the Elite Four. On to Struggles. A full restore comes in as Struggles uses Calm Mind and then uses Calm Mind again, as Banette uses Shadow Ball, doing about 60% damage to Struggles. I cannot afford to take another hit. Struggles uses Psychic, knocking out Banette. Then Struggle uses Psychic, knocking out Banette. Then Struggle uses Psychic, knocking out Dusclops. Then Struggle uses Thunderbolt, I know, new and weird, right? Knocking out Sableye and winning me the fight. Phoebe was definitely less of a pushover than the first one, but still not exactly that hard, and I probably didn't need to sack Natafrig on that. But, oh well. Third up is Glacia, and I send out Chimber against Celio. I use Yawn on Celio as it sets up Hail. Gross. Then I use Psychic for about 60% as it returns a Body Slam that really doesn't do a whole lot and then falls asleep. Then I decide to swap to Struggles, and I use Calm Mind twice in a row, and then Celio wakes up and uses Body Slam, again, not for much damage. And then Struggles uses Psychic, and then KOs and uses Psychic, and then KOs and uses Psychic, and then KOs, and uses Thunderbolt and then KOs, and then uses Thunderbolt, and then KOs for the win. Now, for a Psychics only run, where I've been spamming mostly just Psychic and Thunderbolt, you might be worried that I'm not going to be able to take on Drake. But I haven't used Starfy in this run yet, and Starfy is wonderful and knows Ice Beam. So on the first turn, Shelgon goes for Protect, so Starfy doesn't really do anything. Then on the second turn, Starfy uses Ice Beam, knocking it out and going to Flygon. Then I knock Flygon out and go to Salamence, knock Salamence out and go to Altaria, and knock Altaria out and go to Kingdra, all going down to a single Ice Beam each. I get a little cocky and use Ice Beam against Kingdra, forgetting that it's Water type and it only does about a quarter health. That's not good. It goes for Dragon Dance, and then goes for Dragon Dance again as I go for Psychic instead, doing about half, but unfortunately putting it in range for full restore. As a full restore comes out, Starfy uses Psychic for about half and gets the special defense drop, which means I'm guaranteed to knock it out with another Psychic as long as I don't get knocked out next turn. Kingdra goes for Body Slam and paralyzes, oh no, and Psychic connects for the KO and the win against Drake. That was way easier than it honestly should have been, though to be fair, I guarantee that me messing up against Kingdra could have gone incredibly poorly if the RNG was bad enough. Now, I'd love to do some sort of big crazy build-up for the champion and how hard it was to fight the champion, but I'm gonna be honest, Wallace is probably the biggest pushover of a champion that we've ever had. I have genuinely struggled more against Gita than against this idiot. I don't know why they decided to make this person the champion in Emerald. It's honestly the worst part of Emerald. Anyways, I decide to send out Chimber against Wailord and use Yawn. Wailord uses Water Spout and knocks out Chimber, but that's fine because it allows me a clean switch into Struggles. Struggles uses Calm Mind as Wailord sets up Rain Dance and falls asleep. Then I use Calm Mind, and Calm Mind as Wailord stays asleep. I use it 3 times just in case I have to play around ranges because I'm not super familiar with all that, but then I decide not to take any more chances on Wailord waking up and use Thunderbolt to knock it out. Then I use Psychic to knock out the Tentacruel, Thunderbolt to knock out the Ludicolo, which crits, Psychic to knock out the Wishcash, Thunderbolt to knock out the Gyarados, and finally Psychic to knock out the Milotic, winning me the entire run. I genuinely didn't think I would get to Wallace, but honestly once I walked into that champion room, I knew that unless RNG really hated me, I was probably going to win that fight. Wallace is the most underwhelming final boss of any Pokemon game, and you might be saying, well, why not go fight Steven after the post-game? To which I say, no! I refuse. I don't want to grind for that long, just for a little bit of footage, and I've already put a lot of effort into this Nuzlocke. Anyways, that was genuinely a really fun experience, if a bit of a stressful one. And, to be completely honest, is something I might be interested in doing again. Though not with the latest games, since I don't have a thing that I can set up to record that just yet. If you thought that this video was good, or at the very least promising, go ahead and hit that subscribe and like button. Also, if you're interested in Star Trek perchance, I am working on a very long and huge Star Trek video that is only the first in a series of Star Trek videos. So, yeah, if you're a fan of the original series, the animated series, the original series movies, the Kelvin movies, or Deep Space Nine, that video might just be for you. Or it might be garbage. We'll see when it comes out. Anyways, I've been Jazzy Waffles, and I'll see you guys in the next video.